Anansi, the African trickster, spider, and thief of wisdom. Imagine a world where every story you have ever heard belongs to a single being. A world where every tale, every lesson, and every piece of human wisdom is woven into the web of an eight-legged god. Sounds like fantasy. Yet, in West Africa, there is a saying that endures to this day. There is no story without Anansi. Today, we will explore the world of one of the most mysterious and influential figures in African mythology. Anansi, the trickster spider who stole wisdom from the gods and gave it to humanity. But be careful, this hero is far more complex than he may seem at first glance. Anansi is not just a character from folklore. He is an archetype who exists on the boundary between worlds. Imagine a being that can be both a tiny spider hiding in the corner of a hut and a powerful god capable of outwitting the sky itself. His name in the Akan language literally means spider, but behind this simple word lies an entire universe of meaning. In some stories, he appears as a wise old man with spider legs instead of arms. In others, he is a simple spider who suddenly begins to speak with a human voice. What is most remarkable about Anansi is his ability to be both hero and villain, a teacher and trickster, creator and destroyer all at once. Why a spider? Symbolism and origins. In African tradition, the spider symbolizes patience, wisdom, and the link between worlds. Its web connects earth and sky, the visible and the invisible. Anansi is a master of such connections, a being who exists beyond our usual categories of good and evil. To understand Anansi, we must travel back to the ancient lands of the Ashanti people in what is now Ghana. Here, among gold mines and dense tropical forests, stories were born that would later cross oceans and change the world. But the story of Anansi is not just the story of one people. When slave ships carried Africans away from their homeland, they could not take their riches, their homes, or their freedom, but they could not take their stories. Anansi became a secret weapon of survival, a symbol of how the weak can defeat the strong, and how wisdom can triumph over brute force. Picture this: on Jamaican plantations, in the slums of New Orleans, in the mountains of Suriname, enslaved people whispered to their children stories of the spider who tricked the gods themselves. These tales gave hope, taught survival, and reminded them of who they were before they became someone else's property. Anansi as culture, hero, and demiurge. So who is Anansi really? To answer this, we must look into the oldest Ashanti myths, where our hero is not just a cunning spider, but one of the fundamental forces of the universe. In the beginning, when the world was still young and unformed, there was the great sky god Nyame. Nyame had a special son, or in some versions, a loyal servant, Anansi. But this was no ordinary family. From birth, Anansi was unique, gifted not only with divine power, but with an insatiable curiosity. Imagine the scene: the young earth, scorched by endless fires with no rain or relief. People suffered, animals died, and the gods watched from above. Nyame commanded Anansi to bring rain to the world. It seemed a simple task for a divine being, but Anansi would not be Anansi if he did things the straightforward way. Instead of simply sending rain, our hero embarked on a journey full of adventures and clever tricks. He deceived the spirits of the wind, struck bargains with the clouds, and played word games with lightning. When rain finally fell, it was not just water from the sky. It was the result of an incredible chain of deceptions, deals, and ingenious moves. But rain was only the beginning of his deeds as a culture hero. Anansi also persuaded the sky god to create night so people could rest after a hard day. He asked for the moon so people would not fear the darkness and could find their way at night. The sun was created at his request to warm people and give them light to work. Each of these feats was achieved through clever plans and trickery. When Anansi asked Niame for the sun, he did not simply request it. He staged a performance, showing the sky god how people suffered without light. He brought a blind old man to Niam, who told how hard it was to live in eternal darkness. But this blind old man was Anansi in disguise, and his story was so moving that even the Almighty God could not refuse. In other myths, Anansi is credited with creating the stars and the moon and even inventing the basics of agriculture. There is a remarkable story about how he taught people to make fire. At that time, fire belonged only to the gods, and people shivered in the cold nights. Anansi decided to steal fire, not by force but by cunning. He turned into a tiny spider and crept into the gods' dwelling. There, he watched how the gods made fire, memorized their actions, and then stole a small spark, hiding it in his belly. When he returned to people, he taught them to rub sticks together, strike sparks from stones, and fan the flames. Thus, people received fire, thanks to Anansi's cleverness. There is also a story about how Anansi's 6 sons saved him from danger. Each son had a unique ability. Road builder could instantly create a path through any terrain. Cushion could soften any fall. Farseer could spot danger from miles away. Fish cutter could cut anything. Enchanter could tame any creature. And river drinker could drink an entire lake. When Anansi was swallowed by a giant fish in a distant ocean, his sons combined their powers. Farseer saw where their father was. Road builder made a path to the ocean. River drinker drank the water, so the fish was left on dry land. Fish cutter cut open the fish. Enchanter tamed the sea monsters. And Cushion softened their father's fall. In gratitude, Anansi took a great shining orb and placed it in the sky, creating the moon. But even in this noble act, his tricky nature showed. He could not decide which son deserved the moon, so he hung it so high that everyone could admire it, but no one could claim it. These stories show Anansi not just as a trickster, but as a culture hero, a being who shapes the world for people. But unlike classic heroes from other mythologies, Anansi does this not through strength or nobility, but through cunning and inventiveness. He shows us that you can change the world even if you are not the strongest or most powerful. The trickster's nature and the philosophy of cunning. Now, let's talk about what makes Anansi truly unique. His nature as a trickster. But what does it mean to be a trickster in African mythology? A trickster is not just a deceiver or a joker. This archetype exists at the boundaries between order and chaos, between rules and their violation. Anansi is a liar, a schemer, and a prankster who loves stories and mischief. But his lies and tricks serve a higher purpose. They break down unjust structures and create new possibilities. Imagine a world where strength rules all, where the big always defeat the small and the rich are always right. It is in such a world that Anansi appears with his philosophy. Strength is not everything. His stories are survival lessons for those who cannot rely on brute force. Take, for example, the classic tale where Anansi tricks the elephant. The huge elephant boasted of his strength, claiming no one could defeat him. Anansi, tiny by comparison, proposed a bet. "I will tie you with a rope, and if you can free yourself, you truly are the strongest." The elephant laughed. How could a tiny spider tie him up? But Anansi had no intention of using force. He tied one end of the rope to the elephant and the other to a mighty tree. Then he hid and pulled the rope from both ends, making the elephant think it was the spider holding him. The harder the elephant pulled, the tighter the rope became. In the end, exhausted, the elephant gave up, admitting Anansi's superiority. This story is not just a funny tale, it is a lesson in using the system against itself, turning an opponent's strength into their weakness. For enslaved Africans, such stories were not mere entertainment, they were guides to action. But Anansi's philosophy of cunning runs much deeper than simple tricks. In one famous story, the animals argue about who is the oldest living creature. Each boasts of their age, but Anansi outdoes them all, saying, "When I was born, there was not even land to bury my father, so I buried him in my head." This story shows Anansi's mastery of wordplay. He does not simply lie. He creates a lie that contains a deeper truth. In a sense, we all carry the memory of our ancestors in our minds, in our thoughts and memories. In another story, during a contest to see who can tell the best lie, Anansi tells an incredible tale. "Last year, I planted a coconut palm. After a month it grew, and I picked 3 nuts. From one flew a fly, from another a mosquito, and from the third a butterfly. Since the tree was mine, these insects also belonged to me, but they ran away, and now I have found you and will eat you." The butterfly, mosquito, and fly dared not object, for then they would lose the contest. But Anansi is not a perfect hero. He is clever, cunning, sometimes ruthless, a winner in any argument or verbal duel. His tricks can have negative consequences, and his deceptions sometimes hurt the innocent. In some stories, he is outwitted by even smarter opponents and learns a lesson in humility. There is a tale where Anansi tries to trick the tortoise. He invites her to dinner, but when she arrived dirty from the road, Anansi says she cannot eat with dirty hands and sends her to wash. While she is gone, he eats all the food. The next day, the tortoise invites Anansi to dinner at the bottom of a pond. Anansi cannot dive deep, so he fills his pockets with stones. But when he tries to eat underwater, the food floats away. The tortoise says, "You cannot eat with your coat on." And Anansi, taking off his coat with the stones, floats to the surface, never tasting the food. This story shows that even the cleverest can meet their match. It teaches that cunning must have limits, and that trickery for its own sake can backfire. Anansi's philosophy of cunning also includes the understanding that intelligence is not just the ability to deceive, but also to adapt, find creative solutions, and see opportunities where others see only obstacles. His stories teach us that in a world ruled by strength and power, the weak can survive and even thrive by using their wits. This duality makes Anansi an incredibly human character. He shows us that intelligence and cunning are tools that can serve both good and evil. It all depends on how we use them and what goals we pursue. Dual nature and moral lessons. When speaking of Anansi, we cannot ignore his most mysterious trait, his ability to be both hero and villain, and teacher and destroyer. This duality is not a flaw. It is his defining feature, reflecting the complexity of life itself. In some stories, Anansi is a wise mentor who helps people solve difficult problems. He may teach how to outsmart a cruel ruler, find a way out of a hopeless situation, or use an enemy's weakness against them. In these stories, he is the defender of the weak and oppressed. But in other tales, the same Anansi can be a source of chaos and destruction. He may deceive a trusting person just for fun, disrupt family harmony out of curiosity, or create problems where none existed just to see what will happen. This duality is intentional. It reflects an important philosophical idea in African mythology. The world is not divided into absolute good and absolute evil. Every action has consequences. Every power can be used differently, and every person can choose between creation and destruction. Consider one of the most famous stories, how Anansi stole the world's wisdom. In this myth, all wisdom was gathered in a large pot, which Anansi decided to hide atop the tallest tree, so only he could use it. He tied the pot to his belly and tried to climb, but it got in the way and he could not reach the top. Then his young son called from below, "Father, tie the pot to your back. It will be easier to climb." Anansi followed the advice and easily reached the top. But then he realized if even his young son knows what he does not, all the world's wisdom cannot belong to one being. In anger, he smashed the pot and wisdom scattered across the world, reaching everyone. This story shows us both sides of Anansi. On one hand, he is selfish and wants to monopolize wisdom. On the other, he is wise enough to admit his mistake and correct it, even if in a fit of anger. The result is positive for humanity, but his motives were far from noble. There is also a story about how Anansi tried to become the wisest being in the world. He gathered all wisdom into a large calabash and decided to hide it atop a palm tree. But as he climbed with the calabash tied to his belly, it got in the way. His young son, watching from below, called out, "Dad, tie the calabash to your back." Anansi did so and easily reached the top. But then it dawned on him, if even his young son could outsmart him in this situation, he could not possess all the world's wisdom. In fury, he threw the calabash down. It shattered, and wisdom spread throughout the world. Since then, everyone has a piece of wisdom, but no one can claim to possess it all. This story carries a deep moral lesson. Wisdom cannot be monopolized by one person or group. It belongs to all humanity, and even the wisest can learn from the simplest. Another story tells how Anansi decided to become the owner of all the world's stories. He went to the sky god Niam and asked for all the stories. Niam agreed, but set a condition. Anansi must bring him a leopard, hornets, and a python. It seemed an impossible task for a little spider, but Anansi used his cunning. To catch the leopard, he dug a pit on the path the leopard used and covered it with branches. When the leopard fell in, Anansi offered to help, but instead tied him up and took him to Niame. To catch the hornets, he took a calabash with a small hole and challenged them. "I bet you all cannot fit in this calabash." The hornets, eager to prove him wrong, flew in, and Anansi quickly plugged the hole. To catch the python, he pretended to argue with his wife about the snake's length. He went to the python and said, "My wife says you are shorter than this palm branch, but I say you are longer. Could you lie next to the branch so we can measure?" When the python did, Anansi quickly tied him to the branch. After bringing all three creatures, Anansi became the owner of all the world's stories. But this victory came at the cost of deceiving three innocent beings. The story shows that even achieving a noble goal, preserving stories for humanity, may require questionable methods. It is stories like these that make Anansi such a powerful symbol. He shows us that even selfish or ignoble motives can lead to positive results. He teaches us that intentions matter, but so do the consequences of our actions. The moral lessons of Anansi's stories are often ambiguous. They do not provide simple answers to complex questions, but make us think, analyze, and draw our own conclusions. This reflects the complexity of real life, where there are rarely absolutely right or absolutely wrong decisions. In some stories, Anansi is punished for his greed or selfishness. For example, in one tale, he tries to eat all the food at a feast by pretending to be ill. But his deception is discovered and he is left hungry while others enjoy the meal. These stories teach that deceit and selfishness ultimately turn against the deceiver. Anansi's family and story cycles. Anansi does not exist in a vacuum. He is surrounded by a universe of characters, each adding new dimensions to his image. His family is not just a backdrop for his adventures, they are active participants who often prove smarter and trickier than the main hero himself. Anansi's wife is known by various names: Aso, Okonore-ya, and sometimes Asase-ya, linking her to the earth goddess. She often serves as the voice of reason, trying to keep her husband from reckless acts. But she is not just a patient wife. In some stories, she herself displays considerable cunning and can outwit Anansi at his own game. In one story, Aso tricks her husband when he tries to eat all the food without sharing with the family. She pretends to cook a special dish just for him, but actually prepares regular food for the whole family while giving Anansi bitter herbs. By the time he realizes the trick, the real food is gone. Their daughter, Anansi, inherits not only her father's intelligence, but also his adventurous spirit. In some stories, she becomes the main character, showing that cunning and inventiveness are not limited by gender or age. There is a cycle of tales where Anansi travels the world, solving problems and helping people, often with nobler motives than her father. But the most interesting are Anansi's sons. In different versions, their number varies, but the most famous story tells of 6 sons, each with a unique supernatural ability. Road Builder can instantly create a path through any terrain. Cushion can soften any fall. Farseer can see danger from miles away. Fish Cutter can cut anything. Enchanter can tame any creature. River Drinker can drink an entire lake. These characters do not just demonstrate fantastic abilities. They show how different talents can complement each other. When Anansi is in trouble, only the combined efforts of all his sons can save him. This is a lesson about the importance of community, about how even the cleverest and wisest person needs the support of others. Stories about Anansi and his family cover an incredible range of genres, from cosmogonic myths to everyday anecdotes, from magical tales to moral parables. This makes the Anansi cycle one of the richest and most diverse in world mythology. There are stories where the whole Anansi family embarks on adventures. In one, they travel to the sky god to ask for rain for a drought-stricken land. Each family member uses their unique abilities. Aso prepares magical food for the journey. Anansiwa charms the guardians at the gates of heaven. The sons overcome various obstacles, and Anansi himself negotiates with Nime. In another story, the Anansi family helps a village plagued by evil spirits. Each family member plays a role in driving the spirits away. Some distract them, others set traps, and still others find the enemy's weaknesses. These stories show that the strength of a family lies not in individual abilities, but in their unity toward a common goal. The Anansi story cycles also include tales of his interactions with other mythological beings, gods, spirits, animals, and people. Each encounter leads to new adventures and new lessons. Spread and adaptation in the diaspora. Anansi's story does not end in the African forests. When slave ships carried people from West Africa, they could not have imagined that an invisible passenger traveled with them, the trickster spider who would become a symbol of resistance and survival. In Jamaica, Anansi became known as Nansi or Kompa Nansi. Here, his stories took on sharper, more political tones. Under slavery, tales of a small spider outwitting powerful opponents gained special meaning. These were not just stories, they were coded survival manuals. Jamaican Anansi stories often contain hidden criticism of the colonial system. In one, Anansi tricks a cruel plantation owner into working his own fields while the slaves rest. In another, he helps runaway slaves hide from their pursuers using his ability to spin invisible webs. In Suriname, he became known as Aunt Nancy, sometimes taking on a female form. This shows the archetype's remarkable flexibility. Anansi could adapt to any conditions, taking whatever form was needed for cultural survival. In Surinamese stories, Aunt Nancy often acts as a wise woman who helps her community overcome hardships. On the islands of Curaçao, Aruba, and Bonaire, he is known as Nansa. Here, his stories blended with local traditions and acquired unique features. Caribbean versions of Anansi tales often include elements of sea folklore. He can transform into a sea spider, travel along the ocean floor, and communicate with fish and sea spirits. In the southern United States, Anansi stories mixed with local traditions and gave rise to new trickster characters. Anansi's influence can be seen in tales of Brer Rabbit and other figures from African American folklore. These characters retained Anansi's core traits: cunning, the ability to defeat stronger opponents, and a dual moral nature. But the most remarkable thing about this spread is how Anansi preserved his essence while adapting to new conditions. Wherever his stories appeared, he remained a symbol that intelligence can overcome strength, the weak can outwit the strong, and culture can survive even in the harshest conditions. Today, Anansi continues his journey around the world. He appears in modern literature, comics, and video games. Neil Gaiman made him a character in his novel, American Gods. Caribbean writers use his image to explore themes of post-colonial identity. In contemporary popular culture, Anansi has become a symbol of creativity and resistance. His image appears in graffiti, music, and theater. He is an icon for those who fight injustice, not with force, but with intelligence and creativity. Conclusion. Today, in the 21st century, as we live in a world of global corporations and artificial intelligence, it may seem that ancient tales of a trickster spider have lost their relevance. But this is far from the truth. Anansi continues to influence modern culture in ways we do not always realize. In the age of social networks and viral content, Anansi has become a symbol of how information spreads and transforms. His web of stories has become a metaphor for the internet, a network that connects the entire world and allows even the smallest voices to be heard. Modern artists and writers use Anansi's image to explore themes of racial justice, cultural identity, and resistance to systemic oppression. He has become a symbol of how marginalized communities can use creativity and cunning to overcome obstacles. In the world of startups and entrepreneurship, Anansi's stories read like manuals for innovation. They show how success can be achieved not through brute force, but through intelligence and ingenuity. What can Anansi teach us today? What lessons can we draw from stories that are thousands of years old? The first lesson is the power of intelligence over brute force. In a world where it often seems that those with more resources or power always win, Anansi reminds us that creativity and thinking outside the box can be more powerful tools. The second lesson is the importance of preserving cultural memory. Anansi's stories survived centuries of slavery, colonization, and cultural suppression because people understood their value. They show us that culture is not a museum exhibit, but a living force that can adapt and survive. The third lesson is an understanding of the duality of human nature. Anansi is not a perfect hero, and that makes him more real, more human. He shows us that we are all capable of both good and evil, and that it is important to be aware of this responsibility. And finally, the fourth lesson is the power of stories to unite people and resist injustice. Anansi's tales created communities, gave hope, and taught survival. They show us that even in the darkest times, stories can be the light that leads us forward. Anansi's stories remind us that each of us can be a storyteller. Each of us can weave our own web of stories that connect the past with the future. If this talk has made you see the power of stories and the wisdom of ancient cultures in a new light, share your thoughts. Are there similar trickster characters in your culture? What stories helped your ancestors survive difficult times? And remember, as Anansi himself said, there is no story without a lesson, and no lesson without a story.